I'm Tobin Heath, two-time World Cup winner.
And I'm Kristen Press, two-time World Cup winner.
And this is the Recap Show. This is the first time we'll be watching the World Cup in over a decade. We know we're not alone with how we feel about the way people talk about women's sports. We want to be part of the solution.
Having been there many times before ourselves, Tobin and I are going to bring to you what it's like to play in a World Cup, what's really happening behind the scenes, all the good, juicy bits.
The Recap Show will bring you gal culture at its finest. We all know what bro culture is, but what is gal culture? We're here to define it.
This is our narrative, our culture, and we get to tell it our way.
Welcome to the Recap.
Welcome to the show. LFG.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Recap Show. Thanks to everyone who has watched our first 4 episodes. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe today. Now, as always, let's start with the sports. It's officially the round of 16. We've seen giants fall, underdogs rise, and some truly inspired football being played. The World Cup is intensifying, and so is the Recap Show. Today, Kristen and I are joined by our former performance coach and legendary sports scientist, Dawn Scott, and Sweden's captain, Kosovare Asllani. But first, Tobin's top things. The two-timer thing. Alex, Julie, Kelly, Pino, Alyssa. You all made us believe in a three-peat. Thank you. The first thing. This is the first World Cup where a player wore a hijab, Nuhaila Benzina from Morocco. This is also the first World Cup featuring an openly trans player, Quinn from Canada. This game is for everyone. The Bon Mati thing. Bon Mati in the box? Chef's kiss. The Alyssa Nair thing. Saved a penalty, made a penalty, put the US in a position to win. That's my MVP. The investment thing. Everyone's talking about how greater investment in the game is making teams more competitive. Jamaica had to start a GoFundMe in order to get to this World Cup. They'd like to have a word. The where are the gays thing. To our knowledge, the US Women's National Team haven't started a gay player all tournament. Where have all the gay girls gone now? The millimeter thing. It may seem like we lost this game by a millimeter, but we lost this tournament by a mile.
Here we are back for the daily discussion, and we're obviously heartbroken. We just watched the United States lose in penalties to Sweden in the round of 16, and I can start by saying that I really don't know how to be in this moment. I've obviously never hosted a show, and I have a lot of feelings. I had a lot of feelings. It was a long and troubling night, and I don't know if I should be positive and try to help the country grieve, if we should just be mourning together. I don't know what is the right way to act. I don't know what happened. All I know is that, it's a couple hours after the loss and I am lost. Tobin, do you want to share how you feel?
Yeah, it sounds dramatic, what you just said. Like, is it dramatic?
I think the situation is dramatic.
You do.
I am also dramatic, really. So, yes and yes.
I'm glad we could get just a small laugh in the beginning of this discussion because, there were a lot of emotions watching that game, I think. Particularly at the end of the game when the team was in PKs. I think I'll let you start. I was emotionally prepared for the US to lose. I was prepared for them to lose because they have not shown in the tournament, and even before the tournament, even years back, to be a team, to me, that was going to win a World Cup. So I think I was emotionally prepared for them to lose. But I think the fashion of the loss, for me, if Sweden just came out and won 3-0, I would have been okay, it's over, the suffering's over. Let's clean slate this thing and let's move on. But the fashion in which we lost was pretty traumatic.
I will say it felt, because we're watching these games in the middle of the night, it feels like a nightmare.
Yeah.
And when I went to bed, I was kind of hopeful that I had dreamt it. And I was maybe when I come back to consciousness, I'm going to still be able to watch the game.
Yeah.
That's how it felt.
Yeah, and it was a weird feeling because you, like, it's like the first 10 minutes, you kind of like look over at me and you say, like, we look okay, right? And it was this kind of like fear a little bit, like that something bad was going to happen the whole time. That was a weird feeling to have as a U.S. Women's National Team fan. Like, you always feel like a superhero, right? And that, like, the team are going to do these, like,
The ball
heroic
bounces our way.
things.
Yeah.
And just like the feeling of everything that happened, you kind of like, even when it felt like the U.S. team was playing in a way that you were like, they're going to win this game, it still never felt like that. And, you know, I'm happy for, like, I'm heartbroken for the girls. I don't think they're deserving of this. I don't think there's any excuse for the result of this tournament. There are zero excuses for it. I can go into a whole soliloquy on that, but my heart breaks because every single one of those players dedicated a lot to be in that moment, to be at the tournament, and it's hard. It's really hard. And during that penalty kick shootout, I was like kind of like at the edge of the seat, and you were kind of behind, and you know, I was kind of just like clasping my hands, like praying, and I heard you like sobbing behind me.
There's two moments that I really lost it. The first one was, and I'm going to cry, when Andy scored, because it was so brave.
It was so amazing.
She just took it so well.
She took it so well, and her reaction was just like, that moment, yeah, I was like, I believed. Like when Andy scored that PK and her celebration, it was like this release of energy that I just felt was really powerful.
It was such a big moment for her, and she just handled it so well. I was just so proud. Like, I felt it was tears of joy. I was so happy for her. And then the second moment was Alyssa's face when they called it a goal. I'll never forget the look on her face because she was fantastic. And for the last two tournaments, Alyssa has been our steadiest, best player. She doesn't get any praise. She was so fantastic.
I would say even 3 tournaments.
You're right.
2019 World
had
Cup.
To do it all.
2021, 2020 Tokyo Olympics. This World Cup, Alyssa Nair, like, she's a dear friend of ours, and you know, she will be the first person that says like she doesn't want any praise, but her performance, like, I don't know what more you can ask of a player. And
she took the penalty, the 6th penalty. She literally did it all.
She didn't give up. Like, did she even give up any goals? Like, people were talking about the Swedish goalkeeper, and like, hats off to her. She was fantastic. But like, those like corner kicks that Alyssa had to deal with, the level of difficulty in those moments is so high, and she did it again and again. She rose up for the U.S. Women's National Team, and she became huge.
And that's why it just breaks my heart, because it's just like, you want things to make sense in the world, and they just don't. And when you see that ball just on the line, like, I kept saying, if that's tennis, that's inbounds. Like, I don't think it was over the line.
I didn't think it was
like,
over the line.
I didn't see a gap between the line and the ball. It was like right at the edge, and you just think like, this doesn't make sense.
But the whole thing didn't make sense.
Like,
the whole thing didn't make sense. The whole tournament didn't make sense. If you want to go back to the Olympics, that whole tournament didn't make sense. Like, something's not making sense here. And like, you can just take that small instance, which is the penalty kicks, right? And like, we can just go into this, and like for me, it was like, okay, that Swedish player should have just gone in and ripped the back of the net. They win, right? But it couldn't be like that, right? It had to be this slow drama, you know, which is just like, you feel for it even more. And like, you know, we can go into depth about like the penalty kicks, but in reality, like, these are moments, right? But you add all the moments up, and then like, this is what you get. And so like, the U.S. team, they were happy with their performance, because honestly, from where they were playing to where they played against Sweden, you would have been like, wow, what a team. But they tied that game. They went into, like...
Okay, let's talk about this.
No. They went in 0-0. They scored no goals. They went into penalty kicks. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't ever remember a time when you could celebrate a 0-0 result.
Right.
And not just to say that, but there was nothing, and I go back to this again. When it was 0-0, are we playing that game to win it, or are we playing just not to lose it? Because in the Netherlands game, like, why we were even up in the middle of the night watching that game is because we were okay with a 1-1 game against the Netherlands. We didn't go to win that.
Yeah.
Portugal, same thing.
Okay,
Great
wait, let's
take
a breath.
I actually want to say one more thing while I'm in this breath.
Okay.
Emily Sonnet. You've waited a long time for that moment. Obviously, the result wasn't the result, but that's a long time of training your ass off and being there for your teammates. And I thought you played phenomenal, and I'm so proud of you. And you know what? I don't think you were put in a situation to succeed.
And you
succeeded anyways. You succeeded, and I love you for that. And I'm sorry that it's still a moment that doesn't feel good to celebrate in.
Okay, so I want to talk about results and performance, because what I feel like I heard watching the game was like, now our performance is so good, and in the post match it was like, we performed so well, right? And I understand where that's coming from, because one, we have a performance from the prior 3 games that was being compared to that we improved on. But I think, and it's a question, it's like, aren't results a part of performance too? And like, was the performance good? Like your point, we tied. I think I heard it was like 280 plus minutes that we didn't score a goal in a World Cup. Wow. Can you say that's a good performance if you're not scoring? You know, and I look at the game and like, we did not lose the World Cup last night. We lost the World Cup over weeks, months, days, whatever the time frame is. Like I said, it was a slow burn, all leading to that moment where the ball was parried and up in the air and it barely went over the line. It was like a slow burn to that moment, because like we should have been playing against South Africa at 7 p.m. Pacific time, and it would have been a different game. And that performance would have been good enough to get us through, right? And like the whole idea of like performance and results, like people had said prior, like, we got the results, we got through. We did not get the results. Because we were playing on tough opponent because we didn't get the results.
If we did get the results, we'd be playing at 7 o'clock and on the West Coast, and it would have been very different. You're right. Let's be really clear. The results weren't there and the performance wasn't there. So let's just like get that out, because both of those things were true.
What I heard from you and the commentators and all the fans the whole tournament is, what's happening? That is like how I'll remember this World Cup. What's happening?
Yeah, and I think we were like trying to reassure ourselves, and I think the team was almost trying to reassure us, like, it's okay, we got this. Like, we're grinding out the results. Like, we're gonna get better. Like, and I trust the team, you know? Like, I trust that. But the reality is it didn't get better. And that performance is not a performance, you know, maybe it's a performance that beats Sweden on a different bounce on a different night, but it's not a team that would win a World Cup. Maybe they get through to the next round, but I said it over and over again, it wasn't going to win the World Cup when they were going to come out or leave the tournament.
It's just a matter of when.
It's just a matter of when. And, you know, the rhetoric, to be fair, like, I kind of knew it was going to be this game because of the rhetoric, because of this idea that there was this complacency in, well, we made it to the round of 16. I don't know, in all my days that we said we made it to the round of 16. Like, that was some kind of celebration. And I, as being part of the USWNT national team, you don't compare yourself to anyone. Anyone. And the fact that we were celebrating because, you know, Germany's out, Brazil's out, so maybe it's okay if we go out, because we can say, well, they went out, so we can kind of hide behind this shadow of, you know, the world's catching up, the game's changing. No, that doesn't belong in the U.S. Women's National Team. That talk, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Because I wouldn't want to be a part of a program that settled for the round of 16. I wasn't a part of that program. Like, and I become passionate about this because I dedicated my whole life to that team since I was a kid.
You're a mess.
I'm a mess because
this is awful.
Because when I see that team, I don't see myself in that team. You know, and I love those players. to death. Like, those players are like closer to me than anything in this world. And when I don't see like my players being set up to succeed, that breaks my heart.
But you know what? It's like you have to like take a step back in it, because it's like, why was there any conversation about being okay with being in the round of 16? It was because the football and all the things we talked about, the preparation, it took away the belief. It did. And we started hearing like, we'll make it to, like, the plan's still to make it to the final. What do you mean the plan's to make it? I remember being 22 years old, scared out of my mind, being like, we win or we bust, having no idea what that means. But that's just what was like drilled into my head. And it's like the way that the team was throughout this tournament, to me, showed that they had the blinds pulled up, and they could see that it wasn't good enough. And so they were then trying to smile and make it through it, because they had to show an air of confidence. And then they were saying, you know, like, well, the world's catching up, because they were like trying to be optimistic and positive and say the things and do the things that they thought could give them the best chance to still win, because that's the heart and soul of this team. And it's win no matter what. It doesn't matter if you're saying something that you don't believe, if you're like faking it till you're making it. Like, I believe that every single player did and said every single thing with the most intention to win. And I think that it's the program that let every person down. And I will say the criticism on of the team, of the players, of the attitude, of what the team represents, like, there's literally no place for that. Like, this is a team that we are incredibly proud of. That this is a team that, win or lose, represents every single one of the best pieces of this country, of the spirit of resilience, of progress and change and faith and hopefulness. And like, I know in my heart that this is a moment where you are reborn. You lose and you're reborn. And that is the spirit of the U.S. Women's National Team. Like, no matter what happens, even a loss, even a heartbreak, even a catastrophe of last night, it's like you wake up and you go again, because that is us. That is who we are. That is who this program is. And it wasn't reflected in the way that we combined on the field. It wasn't reflected in our faces right after the match. Like, there's all these things, but it's like, no, I know the truth, and there's no facade sitting here on the couch that I could say that has ever changed. And it will never change.
It's a beautiful team. It's a beautiful group of players, some really special players that I think, like, for the last time we'll see on a World Cup stage, you know? You always think of, like, how you're remembered. And, you know, I don't know in what situation we don't have Alex Morgan in taking a penalty in what seemingly feels like it's her last World Cup. That type of responsibility that you have for a team, being a player like she is, I don't know how she's not.
Can't make any sense of it.
You know, she had to watch that, you know. She couldn't help the team in that moment. And, you know, for all the criticism that any player can have, you know, you want your biggest players in the biggest moments. And that was hard. That was hard for me, you know, to not have her have that. For players that, you know, weren't prepared for moments because of that are no fault to them, you know. You get called to put on that shirt, you're putting on that shirt. You're going to do it to the best of your ability, but were all the players prepared in the way that needs to be for a world championship? Was the group as a whole prepared in the way that it needs for a world championship?
Well, clearly not.
Congratulations, my former teammate, my friend, Sweden captain. It's so cool to see how you've grown into the player you are. But I'm going to keep it quick because you're traveling and you have a quarterfinal matchup to look forward to. But first question, how did your team prepare for the U.S. team?
And thank you, my friend. Yeah, how do you prepare playing against the U.S.? You know, you can have all these tactics, and obviously we know the U.S. are like an attacking-minded team. They always show up on the big moments. Obviously, we heard about the people criticizing the team and all of that, but we know they always raise to the occasion. So it doesn't matter what they've done before; they always show up. And that's what they did against us. I mean, they had a great game against us, but we always know it's a physical battle every time we play each other. So you can have the tactical part is one part, but in the same time, it's like the fighting spirit, the battle.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's insane. It's very intense games every time we play each other. Obviously, we did not want it to go to penalties. I think that's the most brutal way to lose a game. I think the U.S. had an amazing game against us, and I think, but at the same time, it's you have to have the details with you. You know, it's like and that's what we did, like the crossbar and the penalties and all of that. But it's a brutal way to lose on. You know, penalties. I experienced it myself. I know how heartbroken the players are. At the same time, we've lost and won on it before in the Olympics. Last Olympics, we had 2 penalty shootouts, so we have experience from it. Yeah, it was an insane game, and I'm super happy and proud of my team. It's like just the mentality we show in the penalty kicks. Like we have a girl that's like 20 years old who's shooting the 5th penalty. I mean, with all the pressure, and but we know we're doing this together. The team spirit we have, it's incredible, and we talked a lot about this. You can talk about penalties, so much emotional things. But I think we talked about it. Now I'm talking a lot. Sorry. But it's like we have also like a mental coach, and it's all like when you shoot a penalty, you can train as much as you want on it, but when you come there, you can not prepare for the feelings you will have. You will be nervous. You just have to accept it and be prepared and know what you want to do and just be in the moment, you know. So I think that's what the girls did, and luckily we had the Americanos with us.
Yeah, no, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I think penalties are a brutal part of football, but they're becoming more normalized in how we prepare for them. Before, I think it was kind of like go out there and do your best, but now it's actually something that's practiced both on the technique, but also on the mental side. So it's cool to see that kind of evolution to a part of the game that before was kind of just like a flip of the coin. It's not really like that anymore. And, you know, we've experienced it, both our teams, to be on the winning side of that and the losing side of it. And it doesn't ever feel great. But I want to go into something that I think you and your teammates said, which I think is important due to the criticism that the U.S. women's national team has been given during this tournament is what do you think the U.S. women's national team means to the global game?
The U.S. women's national team, they're pioneers. I mean, you are raising the game. You're opening doors for the rest of the community, you know, the rest of the world. You know, you're first with everything. And I had an interview with an American journalist yesterday, and he was talking so much. The question, I was like, how can you ask me this? He asked basically, oh, the the U.S. are talking about the American team is so over, you know, like, la la la. And I was like, don't talk shit about the American team. That's basically what I said. I was like, you can't say this. Like, you have an incredible team. You had a great game. You know, we had an amazing goalkeeper. You're raising the game on every level, on and off the pitch, especially off the pitch. This is what needs to be taken. You know, it's women's football, and our generation are pioneers in every kind of way, like for the next generation. And the U.S. national team are taking so many battles that are opening doors for the rest of the world to do the same. In Europe, we always say, "Oh, did you see what the American players did? Oh, that's amazing! You know, we should do the same. You know." And I said yesterday too, U.S. should encourage you. They need to be more positive. They will never be able to be in your shoes. You know. And trying to always fight for the equal rights. And that's what we're doing in Europe too. But I know you'll get a lot of criticism and all of that. That always comes along with having an opinion, you know. But in the end, it will all be worth it. And I told them, you should be proud of your team. And I mean, you're doing so great. And I think it's hard to always take in the battles and people having opinions, but they will never be in our shoes. And so I don't understand the criticism. I think people need to be more encouraging and positive towards the U.S. because the reason why you have so much pressure is because you've been winning all the time. You've been performing all the time. You know, you got the results. Obviously, now when more countries are investing more in women's football, the game is raising. You know, you're maybe not over here and the rest are here. Maybe it's
Yeah.
like the US, you're still number one in the world, but the other teams are getting closer, you know.
Yeah.
So,
And that's something
but
we should all be proud of. You know,
we
that's a
should be proud of that
right. Yeah.
because the quality of the game is raising. Everything
Yep.
is raising. Investments are raising. Like, I mean, the women's football has a beautiful future, but it would not have it if we wouldn't take the battles, you know, if we
Yep.
wouldn't have an opinion, if we would stay happy with everything that's been in former generations, you know. So for me, I'm sweet, but like I'm proud to see the work you guys are doing in the US, and you should never stop doing that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's really important. And speaking of important, you have a quarterfinal matchup with Japan.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting one. My favorite part about international football is when these different styles clash, and this is very different. And obviously
Yeah.
Japan's, I think shocked some people, but probably not us because we know how Japan are in major tournaments. But they've been doing pretty well. I think you all didn't have your best game against the US, which I think is set you up for a really good quarterfinal because I know Swedish mentality and you all will come out. I have a big prediction on this one that I won't tell you. But what are you looking forward to most about that matchup?
I'm really looking forward to it because Japan, we know them since before. But obviously, it's a team that impresses me the most. Impressed me the most. I just love the way they play. You know,
Yeah,
they're
it's beautiful.
so yeah, it's so beautiful. They're constantly in movement,
Insane.
1-2 touch all the time, crazy finishing. I mean, they're against Spain. They had 4 shots, 4 goals. You know,
I
and
mean,
they're
what's more
so
efficient than that?
it's so easy. It looked just easy, and that's like football should be. It should look
Yeah.
easy. I hope it doesn't look easy against us, but I love playing. I love playing against teams with a completely different style, you know, but also against the best teams. US was
Yep.
obviously one of them. Japan will be that too. We have the strength and mentality that we've been winning games in different kind of ways. Like we have a
Yes.
last minute winner against South Africa, set pieces against Italy, the US, and then Argentina. Play a lot of players that got the time to play that haven't been playing that much.
Yeah.
US penalties, so we know we've been through it all almost. It feels like so. Let's see how it'll be against Japan, but we'll be more than ready. But I'm really looking forward to that game. I mean, we're physical, but they're like
Yeah.
super
It's the
technical.
it's the kind of matchup that you love to see. And as you know, in order to win a World Cup, you have to beat the best teams. And you've now gone through the US. You have Japan, which we're all looking forward to. You know that I will be cheering for you. I can't
Yeah, I
wait
hope that
to watch
prediction
your
is.
watch your magic, watch you move through defenders like only you can do. But I wish you and your team the best of luck and the rest of the tournament. Um, and thank you so much for coming on and saying everything that you did.
Thank you so much, girl. It was so nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you.
As promised, we're here with the legendary Dawn Scott and
Welcome to the show.
And Kristen will now read her bio.
All right. Dawn Scott is arguably the greatest sports scientist and performance coach in the game. She's worked with England, the U.S. Women's National Team, Inter Miami, and is currently at the Washington Spirit. Her work with the U.S. Women's National Team helped produce 2 World Cup championships and gold at the Olympics. USWNT former captain Christy Rampone called Dawn the secret to everything. Megan Rapinoe said she wouldn't have won the Ballon d'Or without her, and she continues to raise the level of resources and care given to professional players. We are so honored to have you on the recap show today. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you, guys. It's great to be here. Great to see you guys again.
Those are some big words there.
They are.
Um,
I'm flushing a bit here.
I will add my own to that resume. I will say we had Jill on the show and she talked about these super factors that were used to win World Cups and how they identified them. When I think of a super factor, I think of Dawn Scott. If we were to boil the ocean to figure out what made the U.S. women's national team great, you would be that. So thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to be able to dive into like really important things going on in the game right now, from a perspective that only you can bring, because you're the mastermind behind the science, the data. You're in the trenches with the players. You've always been pushing for better and for more. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I really, really appreciate that. I really appreciate those words, because for me, I've only ever been passionate about football first and foremost. And then I guess when I realised women also played football, because again, when I was growing up, there was an opportunity for girls to play. I was then passionate about the women's game, and then just kind of then helping to grow the game. And for me, it's always been about that passionate side, and then just always kind of the culture and values that my parents instilled in me in terms of like being a hard worker. And I feel like that in terms of like the attention to detail and the mastermind, again, absolutely flattering, because I don't see myself like that, but I would always just look for, okay, any single player, what things can impact performance, and let's make sure we hit every single one. And probably you guys probably got sick of me because I'd be so like focused. Have you done this, whether it's nutrition or sleep or recovery? But I think it was always looking at that attention to detail and making sure we cover every single outcome for every single player. So really appreciate the kind words. Like I say, I just feel like probably one of my underlying traits is that I've only ever worked hard, and hopefully that then has paid off, whether it's England early days, but obviously you guys, where for 10 years it was unbelievable, just being involved with you guys for those 10 years.
Yeah.
Dawn's data.
Dawn's data.
Dawn's data.
And speaking of like hard work, there's a sound that comes to mind when I think of your hard work.
Oh my
and
gosh.
it was when
Do you know what she's gonna say?
No.
when you had a room that was close to the snack room, and at 6 o'clock in the morning or probably earlier, which was the
That doesn't
blender.
sound good, yeah. I'm glad you've clarified that.
Was the blender going off, where you were individually making every person shake to the exact liking of what was required for them to not only force them to drink it but somewhat enjoy it, and that's just the beginning, like the tip of the iceberg of the level of detail that went into what you did for the team.
Yeah, those days probably made me dislike the variations in milk you could get: almond milk, coconut milk, oat milk.
To this
milk.
day,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
one
seriously.
has ever made me a protein shake as good as yours. It's like not even close.
And it's mad because I feel like
I
on
don't
the
know
odd
what
day,
was in it, but
Oh, there was some
There
good
was
stuff
some-
in
there
there.
was
on the odd
stuff
day
in
somebody
it.
else would make it. You guys would
Oh, we
realize.
knew.
It was just
we
wild.
knew for a second. You were like, please, like, can I get some help? Can I at least get somebody to make the shakes? And we'd be like, just doesn't taste the same. You know, it's like when your mom makes a PB&J sandwich, like you want your mom to make it.
But fun fact, the very first camp this season with Washington Spirit, because we were still getting staff with visas, etc. Guess who was making the shakes at 10 o'clock at night? And I was like, okay, I'm in
back
the
to your
trenches with a
roots.
group, but like this is my last time making those shakes.
Oh
But you
my
know what?
gosh.
I think it is important because your role was so much about getting us to push and go the extra mile, the extra inch, even when we couldn't even see the value. But you modeled that by the way that you approached your job. So like the early mornings, the late nights, doing, stalking everything the way we wanted, like just going the extra mile. Then when you came to me and you said like, do an extra run, it wasn't like you were like
Yes.
telling me what to do. You had like modeled it. And what Tobin said was boil the ocean. You're the differentiator. Christy Ramone says you're the secret. So the U.S. Women's National Team, we say, what's the secret? It's Dawn. You've been on the team with the team for a decade. What do you think was the secret to the success?
I mean, obviously, like my big area was the physical, but I think obviously the technical, tactical, all of the work, peer initially, 2010, 11. Then obviously the tactical, technical detail, Jill, Tony, Steve Swanson, Graham Abel brought in as well. I think we've also got to look at the growth of the women's game. I think it's remiss not to look at that, where, across those years, suddenly there was a change in technology. So now, okay, in terms of the individualization of your training, we can now look at, heart rate, GPS, and can we marry those together and give you individual focus programs? I think the commitment of you guys, like I only ever say, we can give you the tools, but only you guys can dedicate yourself and do it. So
that is a Dawn saying.
Yeah, but it totally is that, because I can't do any of it for you or force you to do it.
But you
I
did.
Still,
you held our hands.
You did.
But I still remember.
You held our hands and led us.
But I still remember 2015. Like you and JJ would play games and then do top-up runs
sure
afterwards.
do remember
You know
that.
what I mean? But
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
was kind of what you guys did to get
Yeah.
ready for the final.
Wait,
and it
can you
was-
explain that? Because a lot of people always ask me, like, why are those players running? Are they being punished? Like, what is a top up run or top off run?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've seen in 2014-15, so first and foremost, all of the research data out there is on the reference 70 kilogram white male. So, probably once we got GPS in, which is a unit you wear on your back and it tracks you on the field so you can measure distance in the different speed thresholds, we would then get a profile for every single position, but then even every single player in a position. So say you guys, when you were playing wide, like you had different profiles, and then Kristen, when you were playing a 9, your profile to say Abby or who else came in through the years? Carly or Alex, obviously, was a different profile. So, okay, what is Kristen's profile in the 9 or the 7? I think for club at the time you were playing 9, but for national team it was going to be a 7, where some of that intense work, which is when you're more involved in the game, which when I don't know, you're attacking into kind of the opposing half and you're kind of crossing the ball, or you're onto a through ball, or you're recovering as well to stop the other way. So some of that high intensity work was much higher when you were coming in with the national team than it was with club. So for me, the only way you could then get you ready, one is part of your training, but then, okay, play a game and then in a safe manner with controlled running, let's top you up so that you're actually getting the same amount of high speed or high intensity running that you would be covering with a national team. So now you're coming in with a national team and actually you've experienced, so have you experienced the highest ever physical output that you're going to need to do for national team?
Yeah.
And Julie was the same. I
So
think,
she
'cause
would play
again,
90
was-
minutes. JJ and Kristen would play 90 minutes, and then they would run after the game.
And not only did that help me prepare physically, but it also was such a psychological edge.
mentally, absolutely.
Like I remember, like I was so proud of that. Like me and Jay, like on the line, like everybody else is like game's over, and we're like our job's just starting. Like that gave us such a. I feel like that was such a big part of the physicality of the team. The whole time you were there, it was like getting through the mentality of the beep test. It was like, were we really doing that to check fitness, or we were doing that to just like check and see if you
Bit
could
of both.
handle?
Yeah, absolutely,
you know?
both of it. Yeah, totally.
That's a massive deal, like the physical and the mental. One thing that was always a part of, I think, where the trust came from us to you and vice versa was you always educated us on the why we were doing things, why were we testing for things, why were we training the way we were training. And I think that was really helpful for two things, for player buy-in, but also for education, to understand that, women aren't just little men, which was, revolutionary. Now people are actually starting to really talk about it, but these are things that you were talking about a long time ago and educating us on. Talk to me about that philosophy, because those, those hour-long meetings that you were like, strap in everyone, like you're going to see a lot of data. Like, why was that important to you that we understood the why?
Because I feel like if you understand the why, then you're going to absolutely understand why. Maybe we're then asking you whether it's the nutrition, the recovery, the super compensation of your recovery, that if you know why we're saying if you can maximize your recovery post-game or post-training, it's going to get you ready for the next training session, or that's when you're actually going to compensate and actually get fitter. Or, I think about the 2019 World Cup where we had that real methodical process of in the locker room post-game, Chef T prepared meals for you guys there and then. So actually, because I remember the game in Le Havre, I think it was, where the kickoff was like 8 p.m. at night. Yeah. It was an hour on the bus, so we wouldn't be getting home till midnight, 1 a.m. Yeah, seriously. But it's like you now start the process, and actually you can start winding down on the bus, and then you get back, and it's that. So again, if I probably just said to you, you're going to eat here, we're not going to have a meal at the hotel, you'd be like, well, what do you mean? Like, that's nonsense. But then you explain the why. Okay, have the meal now, you get it in that 60, 90-minute window immediately post-game. you then can start resting, so actually winding down, and you don't have bright lights on the bus, so now you get back to the hotel. If you still feel like you need a bit of a snack, have it. If not, head straight to bed, and then, you know, we kind of give you kind of more sleep there. So again, I just think, for me, if anybody understands why you're asking them to do it, one is the education to understand why to do it, but then also empower you. Like, okay, these are the things, like I feel like with recovery, we made everything available. The nutrition, we made supplements or foods or whatever available. We never forced you to do anything, but we explained why each one might be beneficial and empowered you guys to then hopefully make those right choices.
Yeah. What was the joy? Like, the U.S. Women's National Team had talked about, like, we wanted to find the joy in this last game. That was a big kind of like part of it. In the job that you had with the U.S. Women's National Team, like, where did you find the most amount of joy?
Oh, watching you guys play, like watching you guys train even. Like, I just even remember first going in and watching some of the small-sided games and the intensity, and I'd be like, wow. So I think some of it was that. I think seeing individual players, you know, succeed or develop. Again, having come in 2010, you know, like so many of you guys were, obviously you'd been in like the Beijing, the Olympics in 2008, but so many players were just starting. Like Alex was just starting.
Yeah, you had the big generation.
Yeah, Pressy, I think you came in 2012, played in Jacksonville, if I remember, against Scotland.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that's exactly right. Oh my
Yeah, I know.
Some serious
There's
data
lots of
right there.
lots
Oh
of
my
knowledge
gosh,
and physiology I
Tom's
don't
data.
remember.
Big
but
brain.
I'm a bit of a stato. But so I think it's seeing like individual players, and if I think back to like big moments or big learner moments, probably one was not qualifying directly in 2010. And then I remember we had a West Coast LA group who had to fly through Paris, and we had like a 7-hour layover in Paris.
Jeez.
And there was like Abby, Boxy, probably Beulah, myself, Heifetz, sat around a table and a couple more. And for 6 hours, Abby just went, we deserve this, like this is our fault kind of thing.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And for me, that moment was probably the biggest learning for a lot of players and staff in there, that you can't just expect that because the US or whoever, like, you're gonna succeed. You always have to be humble and, you know, not assume those things. And then I don't know, like other moment, like big one for me was the day before the World Cup final in 2019, when both Rose and Pino had been kind of actually there was two things 2019, and I'll come back to the other one, was the two that they'd both been nursing things, and I remember the day before they had to check off, okay, we need to make sure they can go max speed because we don't want them breaking down. And like, probably, and if I actually feel like I'm choking up now, and I still remember them striding across the pitch and like both turned thumbs up, and it was like, okay, you good to go.
Wow.
And like, that's a big moment. And then the other one, and probably this is going to be cute and pressy, it was your goal in the semi-final. And I'm choking up now.
I'm on my period, so waterworks are coming in this episode in one way or another.
For me, that was such a moment because, again, you know, in terms of minutes, like you'd come in, you hadn't played, and then you played in that one, and you know, I still can picture you now scoring, and tearing now. Like, for me, just those big moments, and that is part of, like, I guess being part of this family, this group, this team for like 10 years was just incredible. Some of the bonds, because we spent so much time together. Some of it we did this, like some of us, like, you know, at times it was, goodness, like, can we keep doing this and going through this? But, you know, you just got to know people, even if sometimes it wasn't conversation. Like, you just, I don't know, we'd see each other first thing in the morning when some of us are just rolling out of bed and whatever, or I'd just finish my shakes, or like last thing at night when, you know, it's kind of end of a long day and you just knew everything about everybody.
For us, it felt like a level of care that was beyond anything that we could ever experience on the national team. As you know, it's a very harsh environment. It's a very cold environment. And there's something that you did there, which was you created protection for the players, and you saw each player as an individual that had in their fullness, and you really met people in their moments, whether it be their highest moments or their lowest moments. You were there every step of the way. And, you know, we were just chatting about the players that we were texting, and it just reminded me of the little texts you would always say, like checking in on the players, like how impactful that is, on top of everything else that you were doing. It really was
like, that's
significant.
the human touch, isn't it? Like, people like, this is like, somebody else used this spreadsheet about sports science. Like, players are not spreadsheets, and don't ever lose that human touch element. And like, I feel like that was so important for me to get to know the individual player.
All right, now we will take a much-needed break, and there's no better way to recover than with our friends at OOFOS. We're going to take our community questions. Kristen?
All right, I will go first for Kristen to ask Tobin.
Specific.
Jean O. from Montreal asks, what do you remember about your first goal on the national team?
Oh my gosh, go check out my first goal. It is fire.
Really?
Yeah, fire goal. I think it was Algarve against China. I took someone on in the dribble, chipped it over the keeper.
Wow. Quintessential Tobin.
Yeah. It's probably all foggy and in
All right,
black and white,
next.
but yeah. Billy from British Columbia asks, does the milk go before or after the cereal?
Well, I actually hadn't eaten cereal as an adult in ever until very recently. And I put in my milk second.
Yeah, that's normal.
I think so.
That's the most normal. If you want to see if somebody's a psychopath, you see which order they put it in.
The cereal would float on the milk for a second. That would really upset me. Heather from Ohio asks, do you like roller coasters?
Well, Heather, this episode has been quite the roller coaster, but no, I don't like roller coasters.
No.
And the reason being, we actually polled the room and everybody was convinced I liked roller coasters. And the reason being because they lock you in, and I'm not one to be locked in. I'd rather jump out of a plane and skydive or free jump. Because there's nothing worse than feeling locked in, and I know you're going to embarrass me that I am motion sick.
I wasn't going to say a word.
You weren't?
No.
You were just looking at me knowingly.
You're not going to say the truth.
Say it. Yeah, I don't like.
But
What
you
are
shaved
those
yourself.
simulated rides? Oh Lord, that doesn't make for
A happy Tobin.
a happy Tobin.
Thanks to everybody within our membership for submitting your questions. People are asking about our membership. Our membership is the community for change makers. You can join, meet some incredible people with shared values. You can submit your questions for Tobin and I to answer on this show. And if your question gets on the show, we're sending you a pair of OOFOS. And if you get a pair of OOFOS, send us a video so we can see your reaction. Well, speaking of how well we all know each other, tell us some stories about what it was like working with Tobin and working with myself. Obviously, we've got days on end in U.S. Women's National Team Camp, but we also have off seasons.
The best
where
off seasons
Oh
ever.
my goodness.
a big group
Yeah,
of
yeah, in LA.
the U.S. Women's National Team would be in L.A. with Dawn for months on end doing kind of small trainings. And there's a lot of good memories and good times in there. So
Yeah.
what's it like working with Tobin?
What?
Just me? We'll start with you.
So I started in January 2010. And so I was saying to Tobin the other day in that camp, which was new to me because with England, we never had days off in camp. And this was a 3-week camp. It was a typical LA January camp. Probably days where there was that rain and we'd have a flood of pictures and whatever.
Rainy day in LA.
But after every day off, Tobin would be checking in sore and tired. And I'd be like, what is going on here? But I'm also the new girl from England. And I guess the last World Cup, we got beat off the US in the quarterfinal. So I'm but after the third one, I'm like, Tobin, what are you doing on your day off? And she's like nonchalantly, Tobin style with a cap on backwards, probably on a skateboard around the mealroom. Oh, I go play pickup in the car park with Yale and Kate and Nagira. That's not recovery. That's not recovery.
Oh my gosh. That's
But I
exactly
think
what
that-
it's like working with Tobin.
I just think that sums up Tobin in a nutshell. One of my favourite memories of you was the double snake against Mexico in Carson, and then you cross for Abby to score. But you could just so fun to watch you play, and you just absolutely love playing and training. So you were up there with one of my favourites to kind of work with because you were just so easy to work with. Yeah, that smile. It's just infectious, isn't it? It's infectious.
Yeah, didn't you call her teeth?
Tobin
Tobin
team.
team.
Yeah.
Tobin
Go
team.
for Cole. Go for
Goal
Cole.
for
Go
Cole.
for yeah. Go for
Oh.
a nephew.
And you worked with the team for a long time, so you deeply, deeply knew people, which I think is a really important relationship. So we had you left after 2019, and obviously we're now in 2023 with this World Cup. When you left, what was the, like, if you were to pass like a playbook and say, these are the like 3 things that I think need to happen for the team to evolve and be like a world champion in 2023. Obviously that's not possible now, but like what would have been from your perspective ways that you would have tried to like implement things into the team?
It's a great question. I think the thing we started doing the back end of 2018 and then start of 2019 was education around female health, female physiology. And that came on the back of like 2017. I was at a conference in Doha and it was on Train Load and most of the presenters were on males, male research, male presenters. And then somebody in the audience asked about considerations for females. And so they said, we've got Dawn Scott, who worked with the, US national team who were world champions. Let's ask her what she does around the menstrual cycle. And I was actually horrified because at the time we did nothing in 2017.
Wow.
And so I kind of flustered through a response and then was like, oh my goodness, I've got to do something about that. So
I love that.
I then sought an expert in female physiology, female health, menstrual cycle, and spoke through. I think my thing of like, obviously I always knew about menstrual cycles being a female, but it was with 20, 25, 30 players. How on earth do you educate, support? Again, wasn't my expertise. If I think back to my sports science course, there was probably 1 or 2 modules or lessons that were on menstrual cycle and definitely nothing like applied to the female athlete.
Yeah.
So then I sought out, somebody to upskill me, train me, educate me. And then it was back end of 2018, started noticing with the wellness that we did. And for a couple of years, if you guys remember, I asked you just to put in the first day of your period in the wellness monitoring app. And so phase 1, your period, which is one part of the menstrual cycle. And then I was noticing with 3 players especially, there was one who a few days before that day, fatigue would increase. Another one had disturbed sleep. Another one would always flag some kind of like muscle soreness. And it was like, you start then plotting it. It's happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So then it was like, we fast forwarded in terms of the education, and I checked with Jill, hey, would you be okay with us doing education with the team? She's like, as long as it's not just about injuries, because again, there's obviously, some of those things out there at the minute where people are purely saying ACL injuries is around menstrual cycle periods, etc. And I was like, absolutely not. So we then developed an education session, myself and Julian Haig, who worked across the NWSL at the time. We'd come out and do the fitness test, which you guys know. So we'd come and do the profile, and then every year we'd also do an education on an hour with the clubs. And so we kind of did 5 or 6 each, and then he delivered and I delivered. So we did an education session with the teams. And again, for him, a male delivering it, he was a bit like, oh my goodness, like I feel a bit uncomfortable doing this. But then, his second session, his third session, easier. Even me, like delivering it, I was like, oh my goodness, it's not my area of specialism. I know it, and then the more you talk about it, the more you then understand. But also, players would slide down the seats and put their hood up, and it was like, oh, I don't want to talk about periods or menstrual cycle.
Wow.
But then, as you went through the kind of workshop we presented, like you were then mentioning like typical symptoms or things you can do to reduce them. And then players would kind of sit up and acknowledge, and then there would be a bit of a discussion.
Yeah.
And then on the back of that, with you guys, we did a kind of a screen. So, okay, what's like history of menstrual cycle, etc. Kind of what symptoms you typically have. And then we just started tracking and monitoring, and then just provided individual support around different phases where, typically I work off 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. Like Georgia Broomvels has done education with you guys, and at the club now we've got Kirsty Hicks who does that with us. But we look at 4 phases where phase 1 is your period, so the bleed phase right at the start. End of phase 1 to roundabout ovulation is phase 2, and then going to go to phase 4 first is the premenstrual window, like 3 to 4 days before the onset of the next period, and then phase 3 is that kind of like window there. And so then you start tracking and monitoring symptoms for players, severity, the bleed days and then the actual length of menstrual cycle itself. Because if you probably ask the average person out there, they'd say a menstrual cycle is 28 days. Well, it can vary from 21 to 35 typically. So, and again, that's individual for players. When we were tracking some of it with the England team during COVID, like periods were, menstrual cycles were elongating or getting shorter because suddenly the stress is different because you're not in with a club, you're training home. And again, the menstrual cycle and having a typical cycle and it being regular suggests your body is in a normal kind of rest state of kind of stress. If suddenly your cycle's lengthened or your symptoms are more severe or your bleed is heavier or your days bleeding are longer, it suggests there's some imbalance in your body, and that could be training, overtraining, it could be nutrition, underfueling, it could be travel, or it could be some other stressor in your life. I think there was a paper recently that suggested players who had some kind of mental stress going on had like their periods were disrupted basically, and then also potentially greater risk of injury. So so we then, for me, we introduced that education. Not sure if that's continued, but I guess when I then went to England, did similar. And for me, that would be a big area to support individual players. It's so individual, like we spoke before about individuals. And I think it's everything. Like, you look at the training dose response, and we could give you both the same program, but you're going to react differently because of your physiology.
Totally.
Similar like hormones, like the hormones are changing every single day, and your cycle is individual to you, and you guys are not going to be the same. And across a squad of 25, 30 players, you're going to have players with different cycle lengths, different symptoms, different severity of symptoms, some probably on hormonal contraception. So again, what's the impact of that on recovery, on performance, etc. And for me, that's the massive area, and it's the big differentiator of like train women as women. Like we're past again. This reference 70 kilogram white male is what 96% of the scientific research is on.
It's such a good example. Obviously, this show is like sitting at the intersection of sports and progress and equity. And your example of going into NWSL clubs and players kind of feeling uncomfortable with the idea of talking about a period, and in an hour session, like starting to get comfortable and normalizing it. I think it's such a good example of that, because there's no reason for the stigma that we have around our periods. But it's there and it's real, and we haven't studied it because people are embarrassed of it. Like, it's ridiculous. And like, you come from the background of like, if this can help us play better, live better, we'll do it. But it's transformative because it's for everybody. It's not just for athletes. Like, and the some of the tricks that you brought to the national team of like dieting differently in the different phases. I remember that, like how we introduced different food groups during the different phases to kind of balance out what our body was depleting. Those are types of like natural remedies and awareness that could help like women everywhere, regardless of their
like business, military,
everything. Literally everything. It's a part that like we've put a stigma on and we've turned off. And I love that we're just turning it on and normalizing it. It's really powerful. Normalize the conversation.
But educating to empower, like understand your own physiology and how it works for you. And, that is the big aim of doing that education, so that players can then track and monitor themselves and then know like certain phase, whether it's certain nutrients are more beneficial or anti-inflammatory foods are going to help reduce severity of, fatigue or muscle soreness or mental cramps.
There's literally so much opportunity, and I think it's just getting started. And like you having that realization, years ago, like, wow, like I don't have the answer to it. This needs to be studied, and opening that door is like, going to be a part of like your legacy that you give to the game and you give to the world. Honestly, I really believe that. And I think where we talk about like injuries, for this World Cup, it's staggering the amount of injuries, and also the amount of high profile injuries that we've seen, a lot of ACLs. Can you talk me through because I think there's a little like rhetoric going on of why, and I think it's probably not completely accurate. And can you talk me through what's going on in the women's game that we're seeing all these injuries?
I think first and foremost, like we have to not scare players, that players are going out and thinking it's purely menstrual cycle or period related and I'm going to get hurt. Like, I think that's first and foremost, we've got to stop that narrative so that we protect players, because I can't even imagine being in a player's shoes and they have that thought. So I think that's one. I think if you then look at an injury, for me, it's so multifactorial. Like, there's not one reason, one mechanism. I think if there was, we would know that by now. And somebody out there would be a multi-billionaire. So I think that's like the first and foremost. So every injury is so multifactorial. And for me, there's generally kind of like three areas. One is sex differences, so anatomy, physiology. So I know we spoke before about ACL injuries, wider hips, females, intercondylar notch, which the ACL goes through in the knee, generally smaller for females, potentially can fray ACL. Is that a reason? So anatomy, physiology, kind of muscle mass of females, thermoregulation, cardiovascular, body size, hormones. So there's all those sex differences. And again, that's why women are not small men.
That's why it has to be studied.
Piece of research out there, whether it's on injuries, whether it's on training, whether it's on nutrition, whatever. Again, 97% is on the reference white 70 kilogram male. Yeah. Christine Yu has just written a book which is fascinating, which talks about some of the female physiology and some of the firsts of females, whether it's the first sports bra was released in 1976, which is not that long ago.
Wow.
Sex differences is one, metabolism, everything. You then look at gender differences. So if you now go to grassroots, what opportunities do girls get in any kind of sport or soccer compared to on the boys' side? Typically on the boys' side, if you're good enough, you're in a club and you're getting support and you've got, technical, athletic development, good training, etc., good support. I feel like on the girls' side, at the younger ages, you generally have volunteers or a parent or somebody who maybe isn't qualified, doesn't know athletic development, mechanics, etc. So therefore, how are the girls being supported? And then, as girls are going through puberty and start having menstrual cycles and periods, are they educated? And are the people working with them being educated? So that's kind of, if you like the grassroots, then you go to the professional end of the scale. And there's an increase in professional clubs. But are they professionalized? Like, what are the staffing levels? For me, the staffing resources, everything like that is so important, because if you've got a squad of 25, 30 players, if you've got one performance person, you can't support. We've just spoke about the individual. You can't do the individual support. Everybody's going to get a blanket program, or if the team travels and then there's players back, who's working with these players? Who's focusing on these players?
That's all resources.
And the whole, we just spoke about the attention to detail of nutrition, hydration, female health, menstrual cycle. You haven't got a chance of supporting those
we're
players.
more responsible for that as individuals than as having somebody that theirs to provide that's their job that they're giving to the players, and there's so much more responsibility on us to make sure that we're okay. And as the game professionalizes, as more games are being played at a higher intensity, the resources aren't increasing at the same rate as the game is increasing, and that's causing a really big imbalance.
Yeah, because then linked to that, the demands of the game intensity is increasing. With FIFA, I did the 2019 physical analysis, and from 2015 to 2019, there was a 30% increase in the distance covered in the top speed threshold. So intensity's gone up. But then interestingly, when I then also did some comparison of NWSL game loads and US Women's National Team, there wasn't much difference. You compared WSL games to England, and there was about a 40-45% increase from WSL game, which you both experienced, to an England international game. So suddenly for players competing in England, okay, they're playing games, but actually the intensity is much lower at club, hence the Chicago extra running. So that's one, but then also the number of games. Again, the last few years, I don't know, FIFA Pro recently released a report where they've done some trainer load and game monitoring of players going into the World Cup, and Kira Walsh had played 50 games, I think, in the past season going into the World Cup. Lindsay Horan's up there, and then also they looked at players travelling, where I think the top player was an Australian player who travelled something like 120,000 miles or something like that in the last year.
Sure, Ali Riley's up there with travel.
And Sam Kerr was third and Lindsay Horan was fourth or fifth. So we've now got Lindsay at the top in terms of minutes played and travel. And then have they got the support of the club and national team in terms of, you know, like the whole physical recovery, medical. So I think you kind of add those two, like number of games, the quick succession of games, and the intensity have all gone up. And have we matched that with the professional clubs in terms of the support around the players?
Yep. And that's just the physical. Like, we're not even talking about the mental, the emotional aspect of it.
It's so interesting to look at the gender differences and the sex differences. I actually had never heard it broken down that way, but I think it nets out to the reality that the infrastructure is not being built to support female professional athletes to stay healthy. And Dawn, you are a woman before your time. You follow the trends, you follow the data. So what's next for women's football?
The research, you know, let's put more fundings as well, investment into research on female specific athletes. But then also I think with that is, you know, like sports scientists or researchers working together so that you actually have bigger data sets, because if you just have one team and it's 20, 25 players, there's only so much insight or information you can get from that. Again, I think it's combining, you know, some of those data sets. You have bigger data sets and you can answer bigger questions. So I think it's those two hands in hand. Like, first and foremost, the investment, so we get better support around players so that we know they're getting that bespoke, individualized support. And then the second piece, which is not going to happen overnight, is that long-term research. So we start to answer some of the questions specific about female athletes and not just the reference white 70-kilogram male.
So basically just more Dawn Scotts and, like, you know, the
More
whole
Dawn's data.
more data scientists with our powers combined type behavior. So unfortunately, we just watched or witnessed the U.S. Women's National Team lose in the round of 16, their earliest exit from any World Cup. What, looking at this team, I guess my question is, you have known the national team and been a part of it for a really long time, and know that program deeply. What do you think is the biggest difference between kind of the national team that you knew, and the national team that you're seeing now? And you obviously are working with, you know, players, younger players now that are emerging. But, like, what's the generational difference? And it's not to say, like, I think people want to compare generations and say this one is better than this one, and I go back to the grumpy old Tobin being like, oh, my generation. No, like, I believe this next generation, like, this is the generation, right? This is the world that they've been grown up in, so it's very different. But what do you think are the biggest differences, and what do you think are going to be the main challenges in this next generation?
Great question. Way to put me on the spot. Yeah. Obviously, was up early watching that, so pretty devastated with that. Obviously, I'm English, so there's a bit of support for England, but, you know, having worked with the team for so long.
I didn't know that you were for England. Horrifying. Get her off the show.
Yeah, differences. I think firstly, and I think you guys recognise this, like, nobody ever knows what's going on in a camp. So I think we also have to acknowledge that, because sometimes, you know, sitting at home watching the game, it's so easy to be...
So easy.
Yeah. To be the analyst and say this, that and the other. I think the other piece for me is the rest of the world has caught up because of, we've just kind of said there about the increase in professionalism. So I feel like for so long physically, the US were dominant physically, but the rest of the world has caught up because more teams now, more players are training, have the opportunity to train full time. So I feel like that physical gap is closed. So then it's okay, how can the US then be successful or be... evolve in other areas or be the difference in other areas. You know, as well, I guess the youth pathway, you look at the success or not of the youth teams and then the players coming through. But I think the other piece, there's no doubt the talent of players they have got there. You know, those players coming through, you know, probably bias-wise, but, you know, Trinity Rodman, Ashley Sanchez, Andy Sullivan, Aubrey Kingsbury. And then there's others. You know, Sophia Smith, Naomi Goma, like, they've got an amazing group of younger players coming through. You obviously always have transition of, you know, kind of maybe some of the more senior players kind of phasing out. But I think it's now finding what is their differentiator or wow factor to the other teams, because physically because every other team has caught up, and they should, like if they're not, they're doing something wrong because they're now all training full time, which is kind of like a few years ago, I used to speak about the US team, like we're not a club team. We're not quite a club team, but we're more than a national team because we spend so many days, like 200 days a year on the road.
Because we had to be.
Yeah.
Because like the club environment wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And we had longer off seasons. It's not like that anymore, though.
Yeah.
I think you talked about the world catching up, right? That's not to say like we've reached our peak physically. I actually think like when you talk about physicality, like we should still be like that is a great strength of our mentality. We should still be pushing like physically, but I think it's actually being more, and I talk about a marriage between tactics and technique. And I think physically, like if you marry then the physicality with the tactics and the technique, like all of those things should still be evolving. And like we need to figure out a way to evolve and to evolve faster than other people, because that's the way you stay at the top. You don't stay at the top by staying mediocre. I remember 2015 to 2019, we would not win 2019 if we were the 2015 team. We had to evolve, we had to change, we had to adapt. And I don't know if there was any or what the adaptation was between 2019 and 2023, or like obviously there were new players, but like I don't know what was circled that said, this is how we win the 2023 World Cup. And if there was something circled, please somebody let me know what they were, because I didn't see them or anything that could have helped us. Harsh. Good thing we ended that. That's why I said I didn't know. But just to close out, Dawn, thank you so much. This is a conversation that is so needed and so valued. We've been fortunate enough to have you as part of our journeys in our lives, and it has transformed us as people and has allowed us to step into our power, which you've given to so many people, and you're going to continue to do so. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for all
right
of the
here, Dawn
marginal
Scott.
gains, right? As most of you know by now, we like to finish each episode by looking forward to a matchup. And the one that I'm looking forward to is the quarterfinal matchup between Sweden and Japan. For anybody that loves international football, and in particular World Cups, these are two teams that have very different styles of play, and two teams that are coming into this game with probably a little bit different of performances. Sweden completely underperformed in their game against the US, while Japan keeps doing no wrong in this tournament. I'm worried about Japan on set pieces, and I think that this could be a very strong test for them. I'm going to predict 2-1 Sweden. Let's see if I'm right next episode, and as always, please rate, review, and subscribe.